Minister, Professor, it is really, truly a great honor for me to moderate this dialogue between the Greek Minister of Finance and President of the Eurogroup, Mr. Kyriakos Pierakakis, and philosopher Michael Sandel, professor at Harvard University. This meeting has been organized by the Jean-Jacques Rousseau Society, of which I am president, and the University of Geneva, where I teach with my colleague Fabrice Brandly, I want to thank, in collaboration with the Greek weekly Vήμα, whom I would like to thank too for their intellectual and logistical support in the person of Άγγελος Αλεξόπουλος. Our goal here, our aim, is not to replay the old sin of the philosopher, Michael Sandel, and the politician, the minister. A sin marked by disagreement, the former, the philosopher, giving lessons in depth to the later, the politician, and the later, the politician, giving lessons in realism to the former, the philosopher. No, it's not like that today. Rather, it is about sharing theoretical and practical experiences around a question whose urgency was first articulated by Rousseau in his Second Discours. The question of the origins and foundations of inequality among men. Actually, for Rousseau, and I would say for Sandel too, inequality is not just one political problem among many. It is the essential political problem, meaning that it is the problem that politics is called upon to solve. If humans transformed their early communities into political society, it was to establish systems of legislations that would allow them to be all equally free. Because inequality hinders freedom, which is something that those who are victims of inequality suffer from constantly. Inequality is a very common feeling. It provokes indignation, sometimes shame, often anger. And when politics fails to address inequality or addresses inequality poorly, citizens lose hope in it and turn to extreme forms of violence. Pierakakis is currently Greece's Minister of Finance, having previously served as a Minister of Education and of Digital Reforms. He now heads the Eurogroup. Michael Sandel is one of the most influential political philosophers of our times. He teaches political and moral philosophy at Harvard and is the author of powerful, profound, and thought-provoking works. I could quote Liberalism and the Limits of Justice. I could quote The Case Against Perfections, Ethics in the Age of Genetic Engineering, but also a beautiful book, What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets, The Tyranny of Merits, What Equality Means, A Conversation with Thomas Piketty, and Michael Sandel just won the Belgrade Prize, which is the Nobel for the philosopher. First of all, about the dignity, the dimension of dignity. When does inequality, Michael, stop being an economic issue and become a civic injury? Is it possible to think about inequality without thinking about the common good?
Thank you, Professor Rueff, and thank you Minister Pierakakis, for this conversation. I'm honored to be a part of it. To answer your question, Martin, when inequality becomes more than an economic matter, but a kind of civic injury, let me tell you an anecdote. A couple of years ago, my family and I were on vacation in Florida. We were staying in a condominium, and I got into the elevator, and there was a woman in the elevator. She said to me, "Where are you from?" I said, "Boston." Her reply, she said, "I am from Iowa, and do you know, in Iowa, we can read." I found this a very puzzling reply. I had not said, "I'm a Harvard professor." I was not wearing a Harvard sweatshirt. I was not even wearing a Boston Red Sox baseball cap. All I said was I was from Boston. And then when the elevator came to her floor and she walked out, she said to me, "You know, we don't very much like people from the coasts." Now, it seems to me, now she was probably middle class, upper middle class woman. So this is not about a sense of economic grievance or economic injury or inequality, but telling me with a sense of resentment, you know, we can read in Iowa, suggests the kind of civic injury, Martin, that you are referring to. And I think that this exchange, this puzzling exchange at the time, was a kind of window into the sense of grievance and resentment that goes right to questions of dignity and recognition that underlies the polarization that afflicts many of our societies, and that has opened the way to a kind of authoritarian populist backlash against elites that is casting a shadow over the future of democracy. So if I could put, do you think that the mainstream political parties of the center left and the center right over the past 4 or 5 decades have contributed to, or put it this way, failed to address the deepening economic inequalities and have contributed to turning those inequalities, those economic inequalities, into inequalities of respect, dignity, social recognition, and esteem? What do you think?
I think that this is a very pertinent question. First, with regards to how we structure the equation of inequality within the economic system per se or within a broader social system, I would say that any economic equation is structured in a social context. And only to view economics in terms of sheer data without social interpretations, I think it's de facto mistaken. Of course, there are certain, I would say, objective variables that one can see at, being able to have a certain level of sustenance, being able to sustain a household. But apart from that, you also have equalities of opportunity and inequalities in terms of opportunity, and you have parameters of mobility, which are extremely important in order to be able to uphold the social contract. And since you mentioned the traditional political parties, from my understanding, the sheer interpretation of what constitutes left, center, and right starts from the French Revolution, how the representatives sat at that time. So those who wanted to uphold the existing order or those who wanted to completely change it. And the definitions have evolved a lot in the process because the economy has changed a lot in the process. Social systems have changed a lot in the process, and technology has changed a lot in the process. That being, in Schumpeterian terms, I would say the locomotive of change in economic growth. Our world is exponential, and political parties haven't managed to respond, I would say throughout the world, not only in Europe, in those exponential challenges. So we understand the world linearly, even though the world is increasingly exponential, and the political systems unfortunately react in a sublinear fashion. So in this regard, I think it's still quite difficult to address the challenges of today because our political vocabulary has, to a very large extent, you framed it as in the last 3-4 decades. I would say that still many political parties employ the political vocabulary of the 70s and the 80s, but we live in a different era and a different world. And in order to address the emerging inequalities and the emerging growth challenges, we need to adapt our vocabulary to that as well. Final point, I would say to this question, I was very much influenced as a student by the work of Robert Putnam and social capital and how we manage to structure social relationships, be that a function of both social systems and the economic equation itself. And what we're seeing with regards to what you suggested in your question, this sense of non-ownership to society for certain groups, is also a function of that. We're seeing eroding levels of trust in the social fabric in many parts of the world, and we need to further understand how to catalyze this. And this is not only a discussion for a Minister of Finance, it's a broader discussion about governmental instruments in education, in social security, in health systems, to be able to offer new tools to address emerging inequalities that are emerging in a faster pace compared to what was happening in the past.
Is meritocracy a promise we can keep? Or is it a story we should rewrite? And I say that also because I have been a student in France where meritocracy was a kind of dream from Rousseau. Okay. And then I think, Minister, it's a question also for you, the relationship between education and meritocracy. But first, Michael, if you're okay.
The meritocracy has been seen as a dream, as an ideal, not only in France and in Europe, certainly in the United States. But it's worth thinking about the status of that dream and that promise. If the alternative to meritocracy is aristocracy, or feudal privilege, or allocating social roles and opportunities based on the accident of birth. If the alternative is nepotism, cronyism, and corruption in distributing government jobs, and for that matter, access to income and wealth, meritocracy seems a breath of fresh air. In fact, it seems even the definition of a just society itself. And underlying that ideal is the idea that if everyone had a truly fair start in life, if everyone had all of the basic goods that the minister was referring to a moment ago, equal access to a good education, to health care, to income security, and the like. If everyone had fair equality of opportunity, would that make for a just society? Would a perfect meritocracy make for a good society? And in the tyranny of merit, I suggest that it wouldn't. Now, part of the problem is we don't live up to the meritocratic principles we profess. Children born poor tend to stay poor as adults. It isn't easy to rise, even in societies that put in place strong safety nets. But the question that intrigues me and that I try to address in the tyranny of merit is, suppose we could achieve a perfect meritocracy with genuinely fair equality of opportunity. Would that be a good society? And I argue that it would not be, because
that was your argument.
Right, because meritocracy has a dark side. And the dark side is that even a perfect meritocracy would be corrosive of the common good. It would encourage, and it does encourage, the successful to believe that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit, and that they therefore deserve the full bounty the market bestows on them, and by implication, that those who struggle must deserve their fate too. And this harsh way of thinking about success is what leads to the divide that we've seen between winners and losers, and to the anger and resentments that we've been discussing.
I adhere to what is suggested by Professor Sandel. Everything depends on the definitions. Certain things use the same term to say different things, and everything is context relevant. It depends on the society that you're trying to address. So if you're speaking about meritocracy in terms of a society that does not have proper institutions and you want the institutions to function, then it's a good thing. But if you speak about it in terms of a destiny that is very much affected by your social status ex ante before you start, then it's a bad thing. And I fully adhere to this because my motto when I was education minister was excellence, or our level of meritocracy. It's not about social status. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, whatever that might be, and thus providing you the tools and the instruments to be able to achieve this. Now, is this fully feasible in our social systems? No. But this is what we should be aspired to create in the new social structures of the 21st century, also in light of the technological developments. And I mentioned technology. I would say that the core question, the core challenge for every education minister in the world right now, in a world much changed by AI and fourth industrial revolution technologies, is you design an education system, let's say, for 4 years. And you need to somehow envision and imagine the world where they will graduate being 18 to start. How will that world look? Demographics are changing, life expectancy is increasing in many parts of the world, and technology is exponential. What are the professions of tomorrow, and what types of skills do you endow those children with to be able to address the challenges from that standpoint, to be able to have, let's say, a very good shot at achieving their dreams? This is a function of the economy and the social systems. In a changing landscape, what are the new political cleavages emerging in technology? What are the new political cleavages in regulation? What does it mean to endow every kid with specific opportunities and to have a level playing field for them? And I think we have lots of work ahead of us and not a lot of time.
I worry about two problems in relation to education and meritocracy. One problem has to do with fairness and inequality, the growing divide between winners and losers that we've been discussing. The tendency today of meritocratic educational institutions to freeze in place inherited cultural advantages, those born into favorable circumstances. That's one problem. Call that the problem of fairness. But there's a second problem I worry about, which is the corrosive effect that meritocratic competition and striving has on the way we teach students and on the way students regard their own education and the purpose of education. I look at my students who are the winners in the meritocratic tournament, and they are keenly aware of this, and yet even after winning admission to a competitive university, they feel driven, they feel pressured in the same way they've been pressured for years growing up to compete, to strive, and to view every achievement as a step, as a tool, as an instrument to the next one. And what this does, this is corrosive of the value, the intrinsic good of education, which is to cultivate the love of teaching and learning, of reading, of deliberating, of reflecting critically on one's own moral and civic convictions, to figure out, especially in the undergraduate years, what's worth caring about and why, what career paths are worthy of one's moral and human aspirations. I worry that the incessant networking, the seeking after credentials, the competition that we have cultivated, this is the culture that surrounds meritocratic striving, is distracting us as educational institutions from our mission and purpose. And so that's a worry, I think, that is comparable in importance to the worry we've been discussing about fairness and inequality of access.
For me, digital means empowerment. And this is what we should focus on as ministers of states. I was in a very bureaucratic accounting to be able to create a platform, gov.gr, where we would offer thousands of services to citizens to visit from home or from their work rather than having to physically visit their public services. And we wanted to do that by simplified access public services. And this was something which was immensely popular in society. It's perceived as one of the most popular reforms we ever did. And it's also, I would say, commentary vis-a-vis what the state does. So the question was how redesign the offer towards the citizens in order to give them power. And then you imagine how important this is for people with disabilities, for people with working people with families that cannot leave families to go and visit a public service, especially very bureaucratic one. But you have the world of Kafka, you also have the world of Orwell. So what I just described was addressing the challenges of the world of Kafka. But we also need to address the latter, and this is where regulation plays a huge role. And we often speak about the EU being a regulatory superpower in negative terms, or we believe that we overregulate certain things. And we should simplify. I've been one of the very strong advocates of simplifying regulations that we have. But on the other, I would say, end, proper and smart regulations like the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe is a projection of our values vis-a-vis what technology should be doing and how it should be protecting citizens in its deployment. And I directly remember from my days at school that we had the dilemma and regulation of the Collinger's dilemma. Regulate too early and problematically affecting the deployment of the technology, regulate too late, ex post, and you don't manage to achieve much. So the question here is how you can be a producer and a regulator at the same time. And I think this is a broader challenge for yet and for technological fields as well. But we need to reverse engineer the social need. Final point on this, technology policy is effectively not about, at the end of the day, not about the technology itself, not about technological solutions. Technology policy is about citizens and people's needs. How do you optimally address them and how do you provide them tools, how do you endow them to be able to solve problems of their daily lives? If understood as such, if designed as such, it can be a very positive force for good change and for social mobility.
So we have the time for one last question. What is for you the moral duty of political leadership today? Is it honesty? Is it imagination? Is it the urge for protection? What is it for you who could define a good leadership against inequality?
I would say it's impossible, Shapur, but you need balance, which is missing from many parts of the world between all of those significant parameters that you mentioned, dimensions that you mentioned. And you need to have this balance with humility, with knowing what you don't know, but knowing that you need to start asking the right questions. And I would underline one thing, which erodes trust in many societies, the lack of efficiency. Because what they say we must do, and what we do, we need to do well and to do effectively. And when we fail to do so, we need to be able to acknowledge it and move fast by changing and adapting. And on many parts of the world, the delivery of policy hasn't been that efficient. And together with the way political competition, let's say, compares throughout the world right now, I think that this has eroded trust towards politicians to deliver change in public policy at speed and at scale. So we need to become more curious. We need to enter this age of curiosity, and we need to do that with nimbleness and speed in the solutions that we will bat.
I agree with the minister that efficiency, government efficiency in delivering needed public services, and in adopting policies that work can contribute to rebuilding trust. But I would add another element of what's necessary to begin to build trust. And I'm not suggesting the minister would disagree, but my emphasis would be beyond efficiency on building and cultivating community, reweaving the moral fabric that holds societies together. One of the most corrosive aspects of the economic inequality of recent decades has been that those that it has separated us from one another. Those who are affluent and those of modest means increasingly live separate lives. We send our kids to different schools. We live and work and shop in different places. We don't encounter one another from different walks of life, across different social and ethnic and backgrounds in the course of the day. And so what I think we need to do to bring about a greater sense of community is to build a kind of broad democratic equality of condition that goes beyond mobility, that goes beyond fairness, that creates public spaces and common spaces.
Michael, it's a beautiful conclusion, and I was hearing Rousseau. I was listening to Rousseau. Build a broad sense of community. That's the meaning of contrat social.
I would say that those spaces that Professor Sandel spoke about, and me coming from a digital background to a certain extent, I would say that they cannot only lead it. That we need physical interaction, but we need to be in touch with each other physically.
Yes. I very much
and digital can augment if properly designed, but it cannot be the nucleus of what proposition that suggests.
I agree.
I think that this dialogue was an example what discussion between a very important political figure like you, Minister, and a great philosopher like Michael Sandel can be. Respect, attention, humility from both of you. If the world was ruled with these principles, I think it could go better.